3 weeks after the ceasefire with Grey Vale, every pup in Silverpine began dreaming the same dream. Sera brought the reports to me before dawn. 7 pups, all waking at the same hour with the same description. A voice beneath the earth, silver light seeping through stone like water through cracked ice. None of them were afraid. That was what unsettled me most. They described it the way they might describe meeting a new wolf, curious, open, unthreatened. I looked down at my left hand. The silver mark that had appeared when I touched the white wolf skeleton had spread from my thumbnail to my wrist in 3 weeks. It pulsed faintly now, in rhythm with something I could not name or locate. Something underground. Oren was checking my readings when I asked him about the bone tree. At the word bone, his hands stopped moving. 3 full seconds of silence.
What are you still hiding from me?
He did not answer. Outside, a red signal flare rose over the northern ridge and faded. Sera's voice, sharp.
Luna, hunter tracks at the border. They are not crossing. They are watching.
I pulled my sleeve down over the mark and stood.
Then let them watch.
They came at midnight. Not a full assault, a surgical raid. 8 hunters in dark leather moving through Silverpine with the precision of wolves who had memorized our patrols for weeks. They bypassed the armory. They bypassed the alpha quarters. They bypassed the pup wing without even glancing toward it. They went straight to the archive. Sera engaged first, her blade meeting the lead hunter in the eastern corridor. By the time I reached her, Rook was already down, a silver arrow through his shoulder, the wound smoking where the metal touched wolf blood. Thorn intercepted 2 raiders at the archive door, but a third had already slipped through and taken what they came for. Mara 7 Crown's sealed file. Gone. I found Oren slumped against the archive wall, blood spreading from a gash across his ribs. He had tried to stop them with nothing but his hands. I pressed my palm to the wound. Silver light threaded from my fingers, but the hunter's blade resisted, coated in something designed to fight silver blood healing. Oren gripped my wrist.
They have our location markers. They know where the White Moon seal is. They are going there now.
Thorn turned a broken silver arrowhead in his hand. Stamped into the metal was a crest none of us recognized. A circle, pierced by a single line. Oren told me the truth at dawn, in his private study, with the door bolted and windows covered against anyone listening. Mara 7 Crown was not a random silver blood Omega. She was the last seal guardian of the White Moon pack, a bloodline that had guarded an underground prison for 1,000 years. The seal she was bound to had been weakening since before I was born. Voss, desperate to control whatever power lay beneath the bone grove, forced another healer to trigger Mara's silver blood awakening. The ritual killed her. She died on the same table where I was delivered minutes later.
I hid your nature,
Oren said, his voice steady but his hands trembling.
Your silver eyes, your silence. I told the council you were simply mute, a birth defect.
I burnt the original birth record. I did it to protect you.
From what?
From the same people who just stole your mother's file.
He opened a hidden drawer. Inside was a burnt scrap of white linen, embroidered with a silver thread pattern matching the mark on my arm. My mother had stitched it herself. I touched it, and the silver light beneath my skin ignited, bright enough to cast shadows on the walls. The clock burned a path through my arm, not toward the hunters, toward a grave that had never been marked. Thorn's hand found my shoulder.
Then we follow it.
We searched my mother's old quarters that afternoon. The room had been sealed since her death, buried behind stacked crates of obsolete border reports. No one had touched it in 15 years. The air still carried a faint trace of jasmine, her scent, preserved by dust and silence. Behind a false panel in the back wall, I found a map burned into leather hide. 7 locations marked in silver ink that still glowed faintly. 6 had been crossed out with a single deliberate line. The 7th, circled 3 times, was labeled in handwriting I recognized from Oren's records. Bone Grove. The ink pulsed when I touched it. Sera appeared.
Scouts confirm the hunters are moving north into dead territory. Old Forest. No pack claims it. No one goes there.
Rook stepped forward despite his bandaged shoulder.
I am coming with you.
Thorn did not tell me to stay.
Sera commands Silverbane. We leave at dawn.
That evening, he assembled the pack. He told them their Luna was leaving to follow a trail her mother left behind, that she would return with answers. Not one wolf looked away. I watched their faces, warriors who once pitted the silent Omega. They were not pitying me now. We left at first light. The pack lined the path from the hall to the northern gate, not to mourn, but to witness. An Omega who once scrubbed floors was now walking toward a truth buried for a generation. Sera touched my shoulder at the gate.
Bring Myra's name back.
She did not need to explain. We crossed into no man's land, and the forest changed immediately. Trees taller and closer, branches knitting overhead until the sky was only fragments of gray. No birdsong, no prey scent, no wind. The air itself felt heavy, like it had been holding its breath since the day my mother died and was waiting for permission to exhale. My silver mark spread further with every mile. By midday, it reached my elbow. By dusk, halfway to my shoulder. It did not hurt. It hummed a low frequency I felt in my teeth, like a song played just below hearing. Rook drew his sword without realizing.
This place feels like it has been holding its breath.
Thorn's wolf was silent inside him, listening, the way prey listens for a predator it cannot see. Something is watching us. I kept walking.
Good. I wanted to see me coming.
We entered White Moon territory at sunset on the third day. The land was dead, not abandoned, but killed. An entire ecosystem collapsed around whatever happened here. No wolf scent, no prey tracks, no birds. The silence pressed against the ears like water at depth. Rook found the first boundary stone shattered at its base, the pack symbol deliberately chipped away by a blade swung with intent. Thorn knelt beside it.
Not weathering. Someone destroyed every marker on purpose.
Every sign that this pack ever existed. We reached the village as the last light failed. Burned. The pattern too precise for wildfire set simultaneously. From the outside in. Doors had been barred from the outside. Escape routes blocked with debris. No one was meant to escape. I walked through what had been my mother's home. The floor was scorched black, but beneath my feet, something hummed a frequency below hearing, pressed into my bones like a second heartbeat. Dust vibrated in time with the pulse in my arm. I pressed my palm against the scorched stone. The hum rose. My mark flared. My eyes shifted, silver bleeding in from the edges. Thorn stepped closer. He felt it too, something ancient, pressing upward against the earth like breath against glass.
There is something underneath us. It has been waiting since the day these fires went out.
And it knows I am here.
Rook found it at the village edge, a smaller building set apart from the rest, the pup nursery, recognizable by the low doorways and faded carvings of sleeping wolves above the entrance. The entrance was blocked by a stone slab that had not fallen, it had been placed from the outside, deliberately, sealed before the fires were lit. Someone had decided the pups inside did not deserve to burn. They deserved to suffocate in the dark. Thorn and Rook shifted the slab together. What lay beyond stopped all three of us cold. Small white bones. Dozens of them. The smallest skeletons barely longer than my hand. Pups, huddled together. Blade marks on the vertebrae. Fractures on the smallest skulls. These pups were not sick. They had been executed, then sealed inside. I knelt among them. Silver light threaded from my fingers, tracing across the bones, recognizing kin through blood memory older than any pack law. One tiny skeleton was curled around something, arms crossed over its chest, protecting a treasure. I lifted it gently from the ash. A wooden wolf, carved for a child who never grew old enough to howl. Thorn's hand was pressed against the wall, his knuckles white, and my great-grandfather sat on the council that ordered this. I am wearing his blood while standing in their ashes. They sealed the door and burned the village. They wanted every trace erased, including the ones who had not learned to walk yet. Beneath a collapsed house at the village edge, I found a root cellar. The entrance was hidden under a charred floorboard, small enough that only a child could have fit through. I went down alone. Thorn stayed above, keeping watch. The walls were covered in charcoal drawing silver eyes, repeated obsessively, as if the artist was trying to prove that what she saw in the mirror was real. One word carved into every surface, 7 crown. She had been saying her name over and over, refusing to let it be erased. The last drawing drawing was different. A woman with silver eyes, reaching toward a door. Beneath it, in smaller, shakier letters, "Mama, do not let them take my voice." I knew these drawings. I had made versions of them myself as a child. Oren always told me to forget them. The child who drew these had no one to tell her to forget. She hid here while her pack was executed above her. She died alone in the dark, still drawing, still hoping. She was family, same silver eyes, same drawings, same need to prove she was real. I touched the charcoal eyes on the wall. My own silver eyes reflected them. The drawing of the door began to glow silver light, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. She was trying to tell someone about the door. She ran out of time. I will not. Rook found it in the deeper ruins of what had been the council hall. A metal seal, half melted, engraving still legible. The mark of the Wolf Council, the body that still presided over every pack. The White Moon extermination had been authorized at the highest level. Thorn held the seal in his palm. His hand was shaking. My great-grandfather sat on the council during the White Moon judgment. I do not know which way he voted, but he was in the room when the order was signed. He looked at me, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw shame in his eyes. Not guilt alone, shame. The weight of a bloodline used to justify murder. You are not your great-grandfather, but my pack was built on his silence, and yours was buried beneath his orders. Every stone in Silver Pine's hall was laid by wolves who knew what happened here and said nothing. He closed his fingers around the seal until the edges bit into his palm. This is evidence. When we return, the council answers for what was done here. I placed my silver-marked hand over his. The seal looked less like a weapon and more like a mirror, a man who was not his ancestors, a woman who was not her silence. The first voice to break the silence does not have to be the one who was wronged. It can be the one who inherited the wrong. She stepped out of the trees on our fourth morning in the dead territory. A wolf woman, lean from years of living wild, her eyes fully silver and scarred white at the edges. Not born blind, made blind. "I heard you the day you spoke," she said. Her voice was rough from disuse. Every silver eye in the territory felt it like a crack in ice. Her name was Aura. 20 years ago, hunters from the Order severed the silver perception nerves behind her eyes. They wanted to blind her ability to hear frequencies ordinary wolves could not perceive. They took her sight. They did not take her hearing. She had been living in the wild ever since, listening to things no one else could hear. She touched the mark on my arm with cold, steady fingers. The thing beneath the bone grove is not a monster. It is the first voice, the original silver blood. 1,000 years ago, the first Wolf Council cut out its voice and buried it alive because they could not command it. Why are you telling me this? Because the door opened when you spoke. Your mother's blood opened it once before and she chose to seal it. Will you make the same choice? Her scarred eyes held mine. She could not see me. She was looking at me more clearly than anyone ever had. We reached it at noon on the 5th day. A spiral of dead trees, bleached white as bone, arranged in a pattern older than any pack boundary. At the center, a stone door, fitted into the earth, covered in silver thread patterns that matched the mark on my arm exactly. I approached alone. Thorn and Rook waited at the edge of the spiral. Aura stood with them, her blind silver eyes tracking me more clearly than theirs. I placed my palm against the stone. The patterns ignited. Silver light erupted from every thread, and my arm answered the mark, burning so bright I could see the bones beneath my skin. The door cracked open, just a finger's width. Light poured out. A frequency, not words. Something older. My eyes went fully silver. Inside the light, a face, young, alive, silver-eyed, standing where I stood now, 15 years ago. My mother. Her mouth formed a single word, and the door spoke it aloud, in a voice felt in the bones and blood and bond. Daughter. I fell to my knees. The light did not fade. The door did not open further. A second voice, deeper and older, spoke directly into my mind, not by blood, by voice. You are the first in 1,000 years who can hear me without being commanded to listen. We made camp at the edge of the bone grove that night. The door was still humming, a low frequency vibrating in the ground beneath us. Aura told us what she knew. It is not a curse. It was the first wolf born with silver eyes. The first council could not command it, so they cut out its voice and buried it alive beneath this grove. Your mother was the last guardian of that prison. When she died, the seal began to weaken. When you truly spoke for the first time, the seal cracked. The hunters know this. Their leader, a wolf named Eldrick, has been preparing for this moment his entire life. He holds a fragment of the forbidden song, the only tool that can seal or release what lies beneath. Your mother gave it to him before she died. She hid her key with the one man no one would suspect. She traced a shape in the dirt, a circle pierced by a line. It is not containment. It is evidence. Why she chose a hunter, why she trusted her enemy with her daughter's inheritance, Aura could not answer. The door hummed beneath us, waiting. We found him 2 days later, or he found us. Kael was young, younger than Rook. His silver eyes did not glow. They burned. He had a scar from shoulder to elbow, the mark of a blade wielded by someone who wanted to cut out his silver blood. The wound had healed wrong. He wore a torn ribbon around his wrist. His sisters. They executed her, he said. No greeting, no introduction, just the words, flat and hard. My father held her down. The pack cheered. She was 12 years old. He had been hunting hunters alone for months, killing them one by one and leaving their bodies at pack borders as warnings. He had heard me speak through the bond from 3 territories away. He had followed the silver frequency to find me. Use your voice. Awaken every silver eye at once. They already want us dead. At least if we rise together, we die fighting instead of hiding. That is not liberation. That is war. Maybe war is what they deserve. He did not stay. He did not leave. He tracked us from a distance, close enough to watch, far enough to act alone. I saw him at dusk sometimes, a silver-eyed shadow at the edge of the trees, his sister's ribbon pale against the dark. He was waiting for me to change my mind. I was waiting for him to understand why I would not. Kael acted 3 days before the full moon. We learned of it through Aura, who heard the frequencies shift before any scout could report. He had tracked a wolf council transport moving through neutral territory. He believed it was carrying captured silver eyes to an order facility. He attacked at dusk alone, precise, lethal. The wagon contained medical supplies for border packs and 2 wounded guards recovering from a skirmish. No prisoners. No silver eyes. The wounded soldiers died from injuries Kael inflicted during the attack. Before he vanished into the trees, he carved a message into the side of the lead wagon. The silver eyes are no longer hiding. Liar. He used my name without my knowledge, without my consent. Within hours, the council issued a statement. The Silver Pine Luna had sanctioned attacks on council operations. Aldrich's order used the attack to justify full mobilization. Every Silver Eye safe house Aura had ever identified was now on the order's target list. I looked at the message, traced by one of Thorn's scouts onto bark. My name, in a stranger's handwriting, on a wagon that had carried medicine and wounded men. He attacked the wrong target and signed my name to it. He thought he was freeing prisoners. He killed wounded soldiers instead. I found Kael in a clearing 2 miles from the Bone Grove. Rain was falling cold, steady, the kind that turned the dead forest floor to mud and made every sound feel closer than it was. He was sharpening a hunter's silver arrowhead against a whetstone, preparing to reuse a weapon designed to kill wolves like him. You killed 2 wolves and wrote my name on their bodies. He did not look up. When they kill us, they call it cleansing. When I kill them, I call it consequence. And the medical supplies you burned? The wounded soldiers who died, were those cleansing too? His hand stopped on the whetstone. For the first time, he had no answer. I understand your rage. I have walked through my mother's ashes. I have held the bones of pups who never howled. But if you force that door open under my name, you give the hunters the proof they have been waiting for, that we are what they always said we were. Then what do we do? Wait to be hunted one by one? We make them see us, not our power. Us. He stood. His sister's ribbon was wet against his wrist. If they were coming for your pack the way they came for White Moon, would you still talk about peace? He vanished into the trees. I had an answer. They already came, and I was trying to make sure they never came for anyone again. Back at Silver Pine, Sera reported that an abandoned order camp had been found north of the border. Documents footprints left behind confirmed what Aura had warned us about. Aldrich possessed Mara's forbidden song fragment and was testing it on captured Silver Eyes, trying to reverse engineer a way to seal Silver Blood power permanently. Orin examined the files with trembling hands and found something worse. Aldrich was not testing randomly. He was searching for wolves who shared my specific blood signature. He was hunting every remaining member of the Seven Crown bloodline. He believes your mother's line is the key to opening or closing the door, Orin said. His face was gray. He is not trying to seal all Silver Eyes. He is hunting your bloodline specifically. Every remaining relative you have, every cousin, every distant niece, every wolf who shares even a fraction of your mother's blood is on his list. I looked at the silver thread symbol stamped across multiple test subject files. The same symbol from my mother's cloth. The same symbol from the hunter's arrowhead. The circle pierced by a single line. He has been preparing for you, Orin said. Since before you were born. Thorn had been silent through the entire briefing. When Orin finished, he picked up one of the files, a council order authorizing the White Moon extermination. His great-grandfather's seal was in the corner. He has not been hunting Silver Eyes, Orin said quietly. He has been hunting your family. The hunter leader Aldrich sent a message. He would meet me at the border, alone. Thorn refused to let me go without him. If he wanted me dead, I said, he would not announce his arrival. I went. Thorn followed, hidden in the tree-line, his wolf silent and ready. Aldrich was wolf-born, gray-haired, with burn scars across half his body. His pack was destroyed by a silver blood chain awakening 3 generations ago. His grandmother survived and founded the Order. He inherited her mission and her certainty. He showed me the silver fragment, glowing faintly in his burned palm. Your mother gave me this. I was the last person she spoke to before she died. She came to me pregnant and desperate. She asked me to protect the door. I said no, my order does not protect Silver Eyes. So she gave me the fragment instead. He had spent 15 years wondering what she knew that he did not. Prove you are her daughter, he said. Not by blood, by choice. What will you do with the door? I did not answer. Come to the Bone Grove at the full moon. You will have your answer. Aldrich told the full story there at the border, the fragment glowing between us. Mara had not sought his help. She was setting a trap across time. She hid her key with the one man no one would suspect, the hunter who wanted her dead. She knew that one day, her daughter would come to claim it. He had been a vault, not a savior. I have been keeping something warm for 15 years, he said, his burned fingers trembling, waiting for the person it actually belongs to. He did not hand over the fragment. He needed to see what I would do. Your mother trusted me with her key. I do not trust you yet, but I am willing to find out if she was right. He agreed to come to the Bone Grove at the full moon. He would bring the fragment. He would see for himself whether I was my mother's daughter not by blood alone, but by the choice I made when the door stood open before me. Thorn emerged from the tree-line after Aldrich left. His face was unreadable. He held the council seal he had carried since White Moon, his great-grandfather's legacy of silence. You just invited the man who wants you sealed to watch you open the door. That was the point. He needs to see what he has been hunting. Thorn looked at the seal in his palm. Then so do I. Aura returned with urgent news. Kael had gathered nearly 24 Silver Eyes at the Bone Grove, the largest assembly of their kind in living memory. He planned to use the full moon in 3 days to trigger a chain awakening. The door is not ready, Aura said. Forcing it open could kill everyone inside the grove. It could shatter the seal so violently that every Silver Eye within range would bleed silver until they died. Aldrich mobilized the full order upon hearing of Kael's plan. 3 forces now converged on the same ancient ground. Kael's Silver Eyes ready to die for freedom, Aldrich's hunters ready to kill to prevent a catastrophe, and me trying to stop both without becoming either. Aura's blind eyes tracked my face. He will not listen to me. He is listening to his sister's ghost. Kael had asked her to stand with him. The hunters blinded you, he had said. You, of all wolves, should know mercy is a lie. Aura did not deny the temptation. But I remember the children, she said. The ones not yet taught to hate. wait. I will not trade their safety for revenge. I have 3 days to convince him that living for freedom matters more than dying for it. I sent Aura ahead to slow Kael down. Thorn sent Rook to delay the Order's advance. Sera mobilized Silverpine not to fight, but to shelter survivors. The full moon was coming. So was everyone else. We ran through dead forest and across the border into White Moon territory, the silver light in my arms spreading with every mile, the door's frequency growing louder until even Rook could feel it vibrating in his chest. Aldrich's order marched in disciplined silence. 30 hunters, silver arrows, a lifetime of training aimed at the same door we were racing toward. Kael's silver eyes waited at the grove, gathered in a circle before the stone door, singing something soft and wrong that made the ground hum. The full moon was hours away. 3 forces, 1 door. No more time for arguments. When we get there, Thorn said, running beside me, his breathing steady despite the pace, what is your first move? I ask him to stop, and if he does not, then I tell him the truth his sister never got to hear. That dying for a cause and living for it are 2 different things. That the hunters are waiting for him to prove them right. That the first silver eye was silenced not because it was dangerous, but because someone was afraid of what it might say. Thorn was silent for 3 full strides. Then, my great-grandfather was afraid of what they might say. I am not. We ran faster. The moon climbed. The door kept humming. And somewhere ahead, Kael was raising his silver-marked hand toward the stone, ready to force open 1,000 years of silence. The bone grove at moonrise. Nearly 24 silver eyes, young and old, scarred and hidden, some who had not spoken above a whisper in years, others who had never met another wolf with their eyes. Kael stood before the stone door, silver light already seeping through the crack, his raised hand inches from the silver thread pattern. I walked into the circle alone. Thorn waited at the tree lean. Aldrich's hunters took positions beyond. Kael did not lower his hand. You came. I came to stop you. I know, but you also came because you need to see. So do I. If you will not lead us, step aside. The youngest silver eyes pups who barely understood what they were gripped each other. The oldest, a woman who had been hiding for 40 years, looked at me with eyes that had forgotten how to hope. The hunters were visible through the trees, silver arrowheads catching moonlight. Aldrich's voice cut across the clearing. If that door opens and what comes through threatens this territory, I will seal it and anyone standing in front of it. He was not speaking to Kael. He was looking at me. The door pulsed like a heartbeat. Your sister did not die so you could join her, I said. She died so you could survive. Do not make her sacrifice meaningless. Kael's hand trembled, but it did not lower. You do not get to use my sister's name. Kael's voice was raw. You never knew her. You do not know what they did to her. I told him about the sealed nursery, the small white bones, the wooden wolf toy clutched in the smallest skeleton's hand, the child's drawing on the root cellar wall. Mama, do not let them take my voice. I showed him the council seal. Thorn carried proof his bloodline authorized the extermination. Thorn stepped forward. He did not defend his ancestors. He held up the seal for everyone to see. The door's frequency surged. The youngest silver eyes screamed. Aura pulled 3 pups behind her body. Silver light bled from her scarred eyes as she absorbed the frequency. When it faded, her hearing was gone, traded for 3 children. I know exactly what they do to silver-eyed children, I said. I found the bones of pups who never howled. I found a child's drawing of the same door you stand before. She died alone in the dark, and the hunters used her death to justify killing more wolves like her. If you force that door open, every hunter within 100 miles will use it as proof that we are what they always said we were. If you want to honor the dead, do not die for them. Live in a way that proves their killers wrong. Kael's hand wavered. The youngest silver eyes were crying. And then the first arrow flew. Silver arrows rained into the grove. Chaos. Silver eyes scattered, some running, some fighting. Kael engaged with terrifying precision. Thorn and Rook hit the Order's flank. A silver-eyed woman stumbled, the one who had been hiding for 40 years, her eyes empty of hope. Rook caught her before an arrow did. He did not know her name. He shielded her anyway. I covered the youngest first pups with my body. Aldrich bellowed from the treeline. Hold fire. Some obeyed. The hardliners did not. The door reacted. The proximity of silver eyes, full moon, bloodshed forced the crack wider. Silver light flooded the grove. Everything froze. A hunter mid-draw. Arrows suspended. Kael mid-strike. Inside the door, a shape visible now not emerged, but present, watching. Pure silver light, ancient, patient. Aldrich's hand closed around the fragment in his palm. It was glowing. He could seal the door now. He did not. Not yet. He shouted again. Even the hardliners froze, afraid of what waited behind that door. The first voice did not attack. It did not speak. It waited for someone to ask the right question. In the frozen silence, wolves turned toward Thorn, expecting alpha command. He did not give it. My ancestors used command to bury truth. I will not use it to silence fear. He stepped back, not giving up authority, refusing to wield it the way they had. A young hunter, barely more than a pup himself, terrified, trigger finger shaking, fired at a silver-eyed child. Kael saw it. He did not attack the hunter. He threw himself between the arrow and the child. The silver bolt pierced his chest. He fell. The child survived. The hunter dropped his bow, staring at his own hands. I rushed to Kael. My silver light threaded toward the wound. He stopped my hand. Do not waste it. The child. The door. Use it for them. You were wrong about so many things, I said. But you were never wrong about the hunters wanting us dead. You just forgot that dying for a cause and living for it are two different things. He managed half a smile. Then live. For both of us. He died. His silver eyes did not fade. The child he saved was still holding his hand. The young hunter who fired was weeping. Aldrich's eyes moved from the weeping boy to the bleeding child to Kael's body. His face shifted, not anger. Recognition. The boy had trained in his camp. The arrow came from his forge. 40 years of teaching wolves to fear silver eyes, and now he was watching one of his own shoot a child. This is what we made. No one answered. I stood. Every wolf in the grove, hunter and silver eye alike, was watching me. I walked toward the door. I did not shout a command to release it. I spoke not as a key, not as a weapon, but as one voice to another. What do you want? 3 words. The first question the first voice had been asked in 1,000 years. It did not answer with words. It answered with memory. I was pulled into a vision, the first wolf council in crude leather and torchlight, and before them a silver-eyed wolf, young and unafraid, refusing to submit to a hierarchy that demanded obedience without question. The blade. The ceiling. 1,000 years of silence, not peaceful, not restful, but a wound bleeding into the earth. When I opened my eyes, I was crying silver. Behind me, Aura's voice, quieter than I had ever heard it. I wanted to release it too. For 20 years, I dreamed of nothing else. But hatred would have made me the same as them. She looked at the door. Ask it. The first voice spoke. Through the bond, through every wolf present, I wanted someone to ask. No one ever asked. I looked at the silver tears on my hands. I am asking now. Not what they did to you. What do you want to do now? The silence that followed was longer than any century. I want to be heard. Not feared. Not used. Heard. The first voice pulled me deeper into its memory. This was not a vision. This was a drowning. I felt cold stone against skin, not my skin, but its skin, 1,000 years ago. Torch smoke and fierce sweat. Silver chains forged in the next room. I saw it as a living being, young, defiant, silver-eyed, standing before the first council and refusing to bow. Its voice was not a weapon. It was a question. Why must I obey you simply because you demand it? They feared what it represented, a wolf who could not be commanded. A wolf who proved hierarchy was not the only way to exist. I felt the blade cold iron against throat. The first council wolf hesitating, not from mercy but fear. The council did not bury one wolf. They buried an idea that wolves could exist outside the chain of command. I emerged gasping, my hands pressed to my throat. Thorn was beside me, his hand on my back. I tried to speak. Nothing came out. My voice was gone, burned away by 1,000 years of someone else's scream. Thorn's grip tightened. It passed. A breath. Another. My voice returned, raw and thin. I looked down. The silver mark on my arm had darkened to charcoal gray. Not dead, changed. It is not a monster. It is a witness. And witnesses do not need to speak to be heard, they only need someone willing to remember. Full truth bled into every mind present. Hunters felt the blade in their own hands and recoiled. Silver Eyes felt the chains on their own wrists and wept. The young hunter who had killed Kael saw the face of the first hunter who had swung the blade for the council and recognized the same fear in his own eyes. Silver Eyes saw ancestors executed across a dozen packs, a network of killing spanning centuries. Aldrich saw his grandmother's crusade for what it was, a war built on a lie, generations of killing in service of a fabricated demon. He fell to his knees. His burned face was wet with tears. Aura wept silver, her blind eyes seeing more clearly than anyone. Thorn saw his ancestors holding the blade and did not look away. He let the truth hit him. He let it burn. The truth did not bring peace. It brought reckoning. Every wolf now knew what had been hidden, the laws they enforced, the omegas they dismissed, all built on the burial of one wolf who refused to be silent. The first voice spoke again, quieter now, its voice worn raw from the sharing. I do not want revenge. I want the truth known. I want to be heard. It was asking me, not demanding, asking, the same way I had once asked the world to hear me. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not make excuses for 40 years of hunting. He walked toward me, every step heavier than the last, and placed the silver fragment in my palm. I kept it. I did not understand what it was, but I kept it. The fragment, Mara's key, hidden with her enemy for 15 years, glowed for the first time in the hand it was meant for. Aldrich turned to his hunters. The order is dissolved. Those who wish to leave may go. Those who stay will guard the grove, not hunt. Some stayed. A few. Enough to begin. But Aldrich did not lead them. He knelt at the threshold of the stone door and spoke the words that would define the rest of his life. I am not forgiven. I do not ask to be. I am assigned to remember. Every day, for the rest of my life, I will stand at this door and tell anyone who comes what was done here. That is my sentence. I accept it. I looked at the man who had hunted my bloodline for 3 generations. You are not forgiven, that is not my right to give. But you are the first wolf in your bloodline who chose truth over the hunt. It is not enough. No, but it is a beginning. The first voice held the words, a song of witness, not a weapon. A testimony stretching across 1,000 years. I combined them. I had never sung before. I had been silent nearly all my life, and every word since had been hard-won. But this song was not about my voice. It was about everyone who had been silenced before me. I sang, not to command, not to force. I sang the truth, the first silver eye, the white moon dead, every silenced wolf called demon for wanting to be free. The song traveled through the pack bond. In Silver Pine, pups stopped playing and listened. Sera felt it in her chest and went very still. Across territories, hidden Silver Eyes felt the song and knew, for the first time, that they were not alone. When the last note faded, I could barely stand. Thorn caught my arm. The silver marks had gone black from wrist to shoulder, not dead, but spent, as if the song had burned through every reserve I had. The first voice was silent now, not sealed, resting in the moonlight, by its own choice. The truth was not buried anymore. It was standing in front of everyone they had tried to silence. 3 packs refused the council's authority. Grey Vale opened its borders to Silver Eyes. By nightfall, the council called it rebellion. The first voice chose to remain at the Bone Grove by its own will. I have been silent by force for 1,000 years. Now I am silent by choice. This door is no longer a prison. It is a threshold. I returned to Silver Pine. The pack met me at the border. A pup ran forward. Luna, what do we tell people about the Silver Eyes? Tell them we were always here. We were never monsters. The first wolf silenced was silenced because someone was afraid of what she might say. But not anymore. At the gate, Sera waited. A dozen silver-eyed refugees had arrived. She had not asked permission. She opened the doors. Thorn stood beside me on the bridge, the council seal set on the border stone. Silver Eyes and ordinary wolves stood behind us. Thorn reached for my hand, ancestors' seal behind, mother's song ahead. I was building, not walking through ruins. My silver eyes caught the moon. I did not look away. Post-credits, Oren checked my readings, expecting damage. He paused, checked again. A second heartbeat, impossibly faint, silver-threaded. He wrote 1 line, then another. Not backlash. A second pulse. This time, he did not hide the record. He filed it openly, under my name. Outside, I was laughing. The first voice hummed a lullaby for 2.